Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillahi wa kafa. Wa salamun ala ibadihi alladhina istafa amma ba'd. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Wa ma umiru illa liya'budu Allaha mukhlishina lahu ad-din. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun. Wa salamun ala al-mursalin. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali Sayyidina Muhammadin wa barik wa sallim. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali Sayyidina Muhammadin wa barik wa sallim. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali Sayyidina Muhammadin wa barik wa sallim. Welcome back to day 16, the Viral Spirituality Bites. Last time we had left off discussing the importance of sincerity, of intention. We were discussing some of the things that cause a person to have some sort of pollution, to have their intention become polluted and make it not for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala anymore. So let's start off with the slides, inshallah. So we discussed number 1, pleasurable feelings in worship. When a person starts attaining pleasure in the worship that they are performing, it's natural that those pleasurable feelings become one of their goals of their worship. That I want to feel relaxed, I want to feel good, I want to get that tingle down my spine. That is something that is dangerous, and that's something that's not desired in the deen. The point of worship is that you should worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because He is your Lord and He deserves to be worshipped, not because you get some kind of special feeling, because tomorrow that feeling could disappear. Will then your worship become less, or will you give it up altogether? Right? That's a test from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that when feelings arise in your worship, do you start chasing the feelings, or you continue to focus on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and not the feelings? And the Mashaykh, they sum it up, they say, become Abdul Latif, not Abdul Lutf. Right? Abdul Latif, the slave of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as Al-Latif is one of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the Asma al-Husna. And Abdul Lutf, Lutf means pleasure, fun, right? Entertainment. Don't become the slave of fun and pleasure, because we have a lot of those already. We don't need any more of those. Number 2 thing that we were discussing is that when you start getting recognition, when people start recognizing that you are doing something good, and they start praising you, or if people see that you're doing something good but they don't think it's good, right, and they start criticizing you, you stop doing it. For example, someone tells you, hey, don't keep a beard, don't keep like a long beard, because you won't get that promotion at work. Don't wear that hijab at work, people will look at you funny, people will not think that you're part of their team, you won't get that promotion. Right? You'll become ostracized in your community. If you don't talk about Islam in front of people, they'll think you're an extremist. Right? Whereas you're supposed to do amr bil ma'ruf and nahi anil munkar, yes, with hikmah, right? But there are certain things, don't pray in front of these people, so just forgo your prayer, because they'll think you're like an extremist if you do so. This comes up all the time, and I'm just listing some very superficial sort of scenarios, but we should understand that when we feel pressured not to do something that we know is good for fear of criticism, that is something that's polluting your sincerity for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because you're leaving that deed for the pleasure of people, in order to please people, and you're no longer pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala anymore. Right? And recognition can come in many different forms. It could be at your graduation ceremony in Hifz, it could be at your certificate that you display to people, or when people introduce you, they say, oh, this is so and so, He's such a learned person. He's such a pious person. He prays all night. She prays all night. She fasts a lot. You need to ask this person to make dua for you. When people introduce you, they say, oh, this is, Sheikh so and so, or this is, Muallima, Alima so and so, and this is, a very learned person. You feel good inside, right? And you start thinking, if I do more of this, people will recognize me more, they'll praise me more. And you don't literally think this, but it's creeping in. Right? And one of the warning signs is that you feel good when people praise you, and you feel bad when people criticize you over doing something good. Okay, so the third thing that I want to talk about today was when there are certain desirable side effects in your that arise as a result of your good deeds. For example, a person starts thinking that, if I give sadaqah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will put barakah in my wealth, and I will, have more wealth then. So you start giving sadaqah in order to gain wealth, which is kind of strange, right? The whole reason to give sadaqah is not necessarily to attain barakah. Yes, you get that as a bonus from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but the point was to do it to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? People start saying, okay, I need to start reading Surah Yasin. Why? It makes the rizq easy. Okay, it may do that, right? Yeah, that comes in the hadith perhaps. But the point of reading Quran is not so that you can use it like a magic potion to grant all your wishes, but rather it's a means to communicate with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to gain guidance. Right? I mean, you're not concentrating on the meaning of Surah Yasin, you're just concentrating on reading it like some kind of abracadabra that will solve all your problems. That's not the reason why the Quran was sent. Right? It's not some kind of Harry Potter magic potion that you can just recite, for your, issues to be solved. Your issues will be solved, but by pondering over the meaning and by connecting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through His kalam. Right? No one's saying don't solve your problems and don't try to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the solution to your problems, but rather keep your gaze on the musabbibul asbab, not the asbab. Keep your gaze on the man behind the curtain, which is, one way that they say it, right? Keep your gaze stuck on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one that does everything, not on the means that He's created. One should never have reliance on the means, but you should always have reliance on the creator of the means. All right. وعن محمود بن لبيد رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إن أخوف ما أخاف عليكم الشرك الأصغر الرياء أخرجه أحمد بسند حسن. The Prophet ﷺ mentioned in a hadith that the thing I fear most for you is the lesser shirk, the ashirk al-asghar, which is showing off good deeds. When you start showing off your good deeds, you are doing your deeds for someone other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're doing it for creation. You're not necessarily doing it for some kind of wooden or plastic or marble idol sitting on your shelf, na'udhu billah, but you're doing it for people, which is also makhluk, the same way that the idol is a makhluk of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and can't help you in any way. When you start doing your deeds for the makhluk instead of the khaliq, it's a form of minor shirk. Right? And the solution to this is to stop doing it and to make tawbah and say, Ya Allah, if I've done any deed insincerely, Ya Allah, I ask your forgiveness for it. Okay? And there's an interesting note over here. رواه أحمد وزاد يقول الله عز وجل لهم يوم القيامة إذا جرى الناس بأعمالهم إذا جزى الناس بأعمالهم اذهبوا إلى الذين كنتم تراءون في الدنيا فانظروا هل تجدون عندهم جزاء. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say on the day of judgment to when people are being given the reward for their deeds, go to those people that you used to show off to in the dunya. Go to them and see if you find any reward for your deeds with them, because you did it for them, so now they should be the ones rewarding you for it. Right? If you did it for me, I will reward you today. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I will reward you today for the deeds that you did for me. As for the deeds that you did for other people, go to them and see if they can reward you for them. May Allah save us from this on the Day of Judgment. It's a very scary thing. Things that we think are in the bank, big deeds. Okay, we're talking about, like, major deeds. People produce big donations and, perform hifz and alim and this and that, and, board of masjid and creating a masjid and this and that. And then at the end of the day, it was all for the people. You go there on the Day of Judgment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, go get your reward from them. And no one will be able to help you on that day unless Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills. So Imam Ghazali, coming back to Imam Ghazali, right? He mentions 4 levels of ostentation. The thing that we talked about earlier, الرياء, showing off. He mentions 4 levels of ostentation. He has such a piercing insight into the spiritual matters and intentions, etc., that he produced these 4 levels. Most of us would just stop at level number 1 and think that's it. But he goes to such incredible depths that it's really amazing to see the kind of spiritual doctor that he is, mashallah. So number 1, he says, acting in front of people to attain praise of onlookers. If the praise stops, the action stops. So imagine you're in the masjid and you're praying, and you notice that the imam walks in the masjid and he's looking at you. You feel that he's looking at you during your salah, so you decide to beautify your qira'ah. You decide to make a longer sajda. Your head starts to shake a little bit, during your salah, as if you're enjoying the recitation. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Right? And why? All because the imam is watching you, or someone is watching you. It doesn't have to be the imam. It could be your wife, it could be your husband, it could be anyone that you hold in regard. If the praise stops, the action stops. Right? If the imam goes away, the onlooker goes away, you start going back to your regular vanilla salah. That's what we think when we think of ostentation. Number 2, subhanallah, acting in private, hoping to be seen. If stumbled upon, becomes happy, quits if not acknowledged. So imagine you wake up for tahajjud, mashallah, alhamdulillah. You get up, you quietly go make wudu, and then you notice that your husband or your wife is waking up. You think, oh, subhanallah, they'll see me praying and they'll think I'm such a great person. Allah gave me the tawfiq to pray the tahajjud. If only people knew, right? And if someone accidentally, quote unquote accidentally, he doesn't necessarily go out of his way to say, hey, look at me, but he doesn't necessarily even try to hide it either. And if stumbled upon, he becomes happy. Think, oh, now, mashallah, now people will know how pious I am. And if no one stumbles on him, there's no glamour in it, there's no more fun in it, he'll eventually quit. This is the sign of insincerity. Sometimes people do stumble upon you doing something good, right? Like you go to give the sadaqah box, to go give sadaqah after Jummah, you pull out like a nice wad of notes, mashallah, and just as you're about to put it in, your friend comes, hey, how's it going? Oh, mashallah, look at that. Mashallah, Allah give barakah. And you become happy that, oh, mashallah, he noticed that I'm putting in like a big wad of notes, right? Or you were trying that nobody would notice your sadaqah, and all you had in your pocket was coins, and they clunk really loudly when you put them in the box. Ka-ching! And you think, oh man, I wish no one ever heard that. Right? I was trying to hide it. Just giving small examples. Number 3, acting in private to feel self-righteous. Lengthening prayer in private so as not to feel guilty when beautifying prayer in public. The sign of this is that the person is only diligent in worship that has a public counterpart. Allahu Akbar, Imam Ghazali. So let's say one day you arrive late for the jama'ah and you find that the jama'ah is finished in the masjid. So people, they push you to the front. They say, okay, just lead us in salah for the people that came late. So you notice that you recited a surah that you usually don't recite. Right? So mashallah, because you've been listening to the viral spirituality bites and you've been hearing about Imam Ghazali talking about, these kind of issues, you think, oh, I noticed that that was riya. I noticed that I was reciting a surah that I usually don't. So that means that was riya. Because I prayed differently compared to how it was when I pray privately. So what you start doing is you start praying differently in private as well, so that you don't feel guilty when you do it in public. It's too tempting to recite Surah Yasin in public, right? It's hard to forgo that opportunity to show off to people about how great your recitation is and how much Quran you know. So what are you going to do? In order not to feel like a hypocrite, you start lengthening your prayer at home as well. You say, oh, so my prayer at home is the same as the prayer outside, right? So therefore, I'm not a munafiq. I'm not a hypocrite. I'm not showing off. So the sign of this is that you only do this for those acts of ibadah and have a public counterpart, right? So there are some worships that don't have a public counterpart or don't have a private counterpart. So this only happens in those that happen in public as well as private. For example, recitation of Quran or prayer, etc. And the last one is also very interesting, mashallah. Acting in private to attain status in the hearts of people and gets angry when not given his quote unquote due respect. So what's this talking about? In order to understand this, just skip to the next slide and talk about this beautiful hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله تعالى عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إن الله إذا أحب عبدا دعا جبريل فقال إني أحب فلانا فأحبه. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves a slave, He calls on Jibreel and says, verily I love so and so, right? I love Fulan. You should also love him. And then Jibreel alayhi salam, because he's been commanded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he starts to love that person too. Then he makes an announcement in the heaven. In the heaven saying, Allah loves so and so, and you should also love him. You also love him. And the inhabitants of the heavens, the angels, also begin to love him. And then there is conferred honor upon him in the earth. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is angry with any servant, he calls Jibreel and says, I am angry with such and such. You also become angry with him. So the point is that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves someone, He orders Jibreel to love that person. And when Jibreel starts loving that person, he calls upon the angels and the angels start loving him. And then they call upon the people and say, you should also love this person. In other words, when a person knows this hadith, right, they start thinking that I'm worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala so much that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves me. They start feeling confident that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves me. And then they think that, oh, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala must have announced it to the angels that you should also love so and so. Right? And then the people should also be loving me as well now. By now, right, the angels' voices should have been heard on the earth, and and the people should also love me by now. So when people apparently aren't giving him his due respect, he starts feeling angry. And why isn't my worship working? Why isn't it working? My tahajjud at night isn't producing its due respect. My wife still shouts at me. My wife still argues with me. My children don't listen to me. My imam doesn't listen to me. My boss doesn't listen to me. Why don't people respect me? Don't they know I pray tahajjud at night? Huh? So in other words, he's worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in order to gain the love of people. Whereas the love of the people was secondary. It was a side effect. A desirable side effect, sure, but it's not something that you should chase after. You should chase after the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's up to him when and how he puts the love of his beloved servants into the hearts of the rest of his slaves. So next time, inshallah, we will talk about some of the ways that shaitan attacks us, and how we ought to strive to be behind the curtain in performing good deeds. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept. Please make dua for this needy slave of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well, that I also get sincerity. And also make dua for the ummah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Wa akhiru da'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.